In my work with businesses, I often find a pattern in the result of both a company and individuals who work there. The numbers are good in the first quarter and good in the fourth quarter, but in the middle 2 quarters of the year they decline. That's because the individuals in the company often start the year with good intentions, they work harder for a couple of or 3 months, but then they don't maintain the level of effort, they slack off. Then in the final quarter of the year, they realize they are headed for an annual interview. They will not be pleasant, that might even end in determination, so they roast themselves, work harder for a couple or 3 months, and finish the year with results that are not what they wanted in January, but are good enough to make the annual review bearable. This pattern will be apparent to anyone who ever noticed that his gym gets crowded in January, filled with people who disappear by April. People make commitments at the beginning of the new year, commitments to get fit, sell more, or work on their short games, but commitments are easier to make than to keep. Perseverance is a virtue in a short supply, except that it's among people who achieve excellence, people who live exceptional lives. I think of Paul Runyan, whom I got to know back in the 1980s, when we both worked for gold ticket schools. Paul was a man who believed in his talent and kept his commitments. He believed in his talent enough to win a 1938 PGA Championship by beating Sam Snead in the finals 8 and 7. Even though Snead hit the ball 60 or 70 yards longer than Paul did off the tee. Paul was only 5 feet 7 inches and he weighed maybe 130 pounds. After a big meal and dessert, Paul was the leading money winner on the PGA Tour or a couple times. In the 1930s, but his playing career was cut short by World War II when he served in the Navy. After the war, he devoted himself to teaching golf with the same excellence he had when he played competitively, though he never gave up trying to improve his own game, until he died in 2002. He was a popular speaker at conventions of the PGA teaching professionals, and sometimes we appeared on the same program one day in Toronto. I listened as Paul spoke to a gathering of Canadian professionals, gathering he had spoken to the previous year. He was by then around 90 years old. Thank you so much for bringing me back. I'm thrilled to be here again this year, Paul began. But I have to apologize to you. Last year I promised to you that I was going to practice my short game for at least 2 hours every day. I promised you I was going to honor that commitment. I wondered where he was going with this. I knew Paul liked to challenge his fellow teaching pros to work to improve their own games, and promised that he would do the same. He believed that working to improve their own game made pros better teachers, but I wasn't sure why he was apologizing. I'm embarrassed to tell you that on the 3 days later, I did not honor my commitment. I hope you all did better than I did, Paul said. The room was silent. The club pros thinking about non-Nigerian practicing his short game for 362 days in the past year. I had 2 thoughts. 1, I was blown away by Paul's dedication to honoring his commitment, and 2, how was I going to follow that in my own talk? I told this story to illustrate how seriously exceptional people take the commitments they make to themselves. Paul Runyan is only one example. I talked a while back with Pete Sampras, who won 14 major single titles during his illustrious tennis career. Pete turned pro at 16 and won the US Open at 19. In 1990s, he was a good player at a young age, but he didn't win another major title for 2 years following that US Open in his own mind. The turning point in his career came when he lost in the 1992 US Open final to Stefan Edberg. He went home and stayed in bed for 3 days, brooding over the feeling that he hadn't been giving tennis his best effort. He wondered if he wanted to make the commitment necessary to see if he could be great. Was he willing to put in the time and the effort to be single-minded in the quest? He decided that he was. And for the next 8 years or so, Pete honored that commitment. He was in the early 20s, making lots of money, traveling to glamorous places like Paris and London to play, as he recalled it. He lived almost monastically in that period. His life revolved around training and competing. During tennis' brief off-season, he didn't take a break. He moved into a condo in Florida where he and his coach, Paul Anacone, could practice for hours each day in high heat and humidity. After that time at the top, Pete's commitment waned. He wanted a more rounded life. He married in 2000 and his wife, actress Bridget Wilson, started a family. His tennis results started to slip. He rallied himself on one last summer of commitment with Anaconda in 2002 and he scored an upset victory in the US Open and that September, but he realized that he no longer wanted to devote the time and energy required to be the best tennis star he could be. Wisely, he retired at the top. Without honoring his commitment, he knew he would be just another player, and he didn't want that. When I work with exceptional people, I always see this sort of devotion to commitment. I see this with my friend Gary Barkeet, who retired from the financial services industry and committed himself to becoming a strat golfer. Even though his handicap when he retired was nowhere near single digits, most people don't think of their golden years as a time to make a serious commitment to a self-improvement program, but Gary does. Because of his commitment, he takes lessons, he practices, he plays, he lifts weight and stretches, he practices some more. He's moving inexorably toward his goal. When a problem arises, Gary is a problem solver. He finds a new teacher, a new gym routine, a new practice regimen, whatever it takes to keep making progress. When I last checked in with him, he was working through back and knee problems. Knowing Gary, I know he will spend it all night on the internet if he has to in order to find a trainer or doctor who can help him overcome these issues and keep practicing and playing. The notion that he's oversharing and ought to take it easy doesn't occur to him. He's not going to give in to the idea that he's old. That's not how he does things. I find it fascinating to watch him, and I find it easy to understand how he was successful in the financial world. Whether you're trying to run a successful business or lower your golf score, the method is the same. Devise an important improvement plan and commit yourself to it. Persevere. Gary has been shooting in the low 70s the last few times I've checked in with him. He's got one competitive 69, I told him, only partly in jest. That's the next problem he will have to deal with, is going to be telling people how lucky he is to be naturally gifted at golf. That's because people will look at him, at someone achieving what Gary is achieving, and they won't want to believe it because of something they could do themselves, like keeping a commitment. So they choose to think it's because God endowed Gary with some special gift. They are fooling themselves. Sometimes the commitment of exceptional people can seem extreme. I work with Chad Noss, the crew chief for Jimmy Johnson NASCAR at Hendrick Motorsports, winners of 6 NASCAR Sprint Cup titles. Chad consistently works 90 to 100 hours a week, pouring over every detail of the race's car preparation, from the pistons to the paint job. This kind of commitment comes at a price. Although Chad says he wants to be married man and father, he hasn't yet found a way to make a relationship run as well. Or as long as the number 48 car he prepares for Jimmy, he's on a mission to become the greatest crew chief in NASCAR history. And until he has done that, it looks as if marriage and family will have to wait. He tells me he might wind up at 55 or 60, married to 25-year-old, and he might, a person who is capable of keeping a commitment to the way Chad does, is capable of almost anything. I took Keegan Bradley, Pat's nephew and the 2011 PGA champion, to meet John Calipari and the University of Kentucky basketball team a couple of years ago. He had dinner with Carl, and Keegan asked if he could see Carl's office, which is high above Rupp Arena, with a picture window that affords a view of the floor. He got there at 11:30 that night. Cole opened the curtains and we saw Antonio Davis and Michael Gilchrist down on the court practicing. Keegan is himself a very committed athlete, but even when he was impressed by the dedication and commitment that had Anthony and Michael out on the court practicing as midnight approached. How do athletes like Anthony, Michael, and Keegan keep their commitments while their peers slack off? It's a combination of things. The easiest way to keep a commitment is to love what you are doing, as Anthony and Michael love basketball and Keegan loves golf. But you have to love the entirety of what you are doing, not just the occasional glory and rewards. I remember a few years ago, Tom Kite and I were asked to speak about attitude to a group of PGA Tour rookies. Tom spoke first. I'm going to let Doc do most of the talking, he said. I'm only going to tell you all one thing. I was immediately eager to know what the one thing was. Tom didn't disappoint me. If you're going to play the tour, you have to love golf all the time, he said. It's not going to work if you can only love it when everything is going your way. Everybody's going in the hole and every car is bouncing in the fair way instead of out of bounds. It's not going to work if you practice every day and only love it when the ball is going where you're looking. You've got to love it when you practice day after day, and you can find it. You've got to love it when you practice day after day after day, and you can find it. You've got to love it when the putt looks like it's going to happen and the lips out. That's what it's about. There wasn't much I had to say after that. If the youngsters got nothing else from that session, they learned something very extremely important, you might say. Well, of course, it's easy to love golf, but it really isn't. At least if it's competitive golf. I run into people all the time who tell me how much they love golf. Some of them are clients. They will sit down in my basement and say, I'm so glad I'm here because I love golf. These clients love reading about golf. They love watching tournaments on television. They love taking lessons and practicing. But after I talk with them a while, a crack opens in this facade. They tell me they're really realizing something, and that is that they love golf all the time, except when they're actually playing in the tournament. When they get into a tournament, they feel like they're locked in a Siberian prison camp waiting to be shot. This is a problem. It's a problem making to having a spouse who loves you except you're together. It's a problem because golf, like every competitive endeavor, is going to test and try the person who wishes to be exceptional. There are going to be times when, as Tom said, all the putts slip out, all the bounces go out of bounds, and the harder you practice, the worse it gets. Golf is not unique in this respect. The best financial consultant is going to have weeks none of his sales calls work out and none of the investments he recommends go up. The best doctors are going to have periods when none of the patients get better. If they are going to sustain their commitments during such times, it helps if they truly love what they're doing, even though nothing is going right. They're engrossed in it. It fascinates them. It never feels like work. I understand that not everyone is lucky enough to feel that way all the time, but what I see in exceptional people is the will to learn, to love what they're committed to doing. Skeptics might dismiss learning to love something as delusional. Skeptics, though, don't understand either the power of the malleability or of the subconscious. You can learn to love something if you make an effort to focus on the aspects of that activity that please you, thinking over and over again about how much you enjoy them. Let's take, for example, the theoretical lumberjack into logging because he loved the forest and loved being out of the doors. He loved the feeling that by selecting the right trees for the cutting, he was going a good sort and helping the forest stay healthy. But as the years went by, the fictional lumberjack stopped noticing the smells and sight of the forest, the birds and the animals, and the clean air. He got bored with cutting trees. He decided he hated the sound of a forest so. Pretty soon he started telling himself he hated being a lumberjack. His productivity fell. He was in danger of losing his job. If he came to me at this point, I would tell him he had two choices. He would quit being a lumberjack and find some other line of work, or he could fall in love with it again. He could start deliberately noticing the force again. He could find ways to renew his pride in his work, and maybe he could get a set of reflex to amuse the sounds of the soul. The reality is that while a few of us are lucky enough to do something we can nearly always love, like playing golf, most of us find that there are things we like and things we don't like about our careers. I've known public school teachers who loved working with kids, loved helping them a better start in life than they might otherwise have. Because of that love, they were committed to improving as teachers, to communicating with parents, to working long hours, to learning new, better classroom management techniques, and devising more effective lesson plans. When I taught at the University of Virginia, I always loved working with students and with athletes and helping them improve. I enjoyed the research and the teaching. I could have done without the paperwork I was required to submit by the university administration in the same way committed and dedicated public school teachers can love. The staff meetings and paperwork they are too often burdened with. The only recourse in this situation is to focus relentlessly on the aspects of the job you love. If you can't, it's often best to consider changing jobs. I understand, of course, that people can't always be committed to something they love. Much as I wish they could, there are always going to be times when you have to commit yourself to doing something that doesn't appeal to you. This is one of the biggest lessons school is supposed to teach us. There are subjects we like and do well, with relative ease, there are subjects we struggled with. For me, that subject was math. I remember frequently being astounded when the teacher wrote a new kind of equation with a blank in it on the blackboard, and one of my classmates instantly raised her hand and gave the answer. My head was still swimming. I never learned to love math, but I learned that if I committed myself to working at it after a few weeks, the answers would start coming to me as well. My dad's strict policy requiring A's and B's in order to play sports helped here, too. I was always good to have support if you need to keep a commitment. It's important to note that a commitment to working on self-improvement doesn't have to be quite as demanding as Paul Runyan's commitments to working on his short game. That level of commitment and dedication worked well for Paul, but it wouldn't work well for everybody. And a golfer on the PGA Tour told me he needed to take a week off every 6 weeks or so to leave the clubs in the garage and enjoy his family. I would have no objection. Excelling at any athletic endeavor demands a commitment to work persistently at the fundamentals and to long hours of practice in between competitions. There is an old saying that you sweat in practice if you don't bleed in the game, and it carries a lot of truth. But there is room for the occasional break. It's in fact necessary to build breaks into strenuous routines to allow the body to recharge and to avoid injury from overwork. But in general, I find most people have a lot of more trouble with perseverance than they do with taking breaks. It's easy to decide to change direction in your life, but any important change requires hard work over time. It could be a short game that's happened, but it's more likely to take a longer time. It's more likely that there will be setbacks and failures along the way. The higher one's aspirations, the more likely this is to be true. If someone who can break 100 on the golf course comes to me and he says he would like to be able to shot 85, the journey is likely to be relatively brief. That's because the 100 shooter probably has a few fundamental flaws in his swing and doesn't practice his short game. If I can get him to take the few lessons from a good pro to improve his swing, and to spend some quality time at the practice green chipping and pitching, I can be fairly confident he will reach his goal in a year or two. But if the 100 shooter wants to be a scratch player, the task requires a lot more perseverance. It is simply harder to go from 85 to scratch than it is to go from 100 to 85, even though the numbers tell you that the two journeys cover the same distance. That's true in most areas. If you know nothing about the piano, you can learn to play a few songs competently a lot faster than you can go from playing a few songs competently to being a concert level performer. That takes tremendous perseverance. How do exceptional people find this perseverance? First of all, they make up their minds that they value being persistent. I remember learning of this attitude in the 1960s when I read an excellent book about Bill Bradley, the basketball player at Princeton. The book was called A Sense of Where You Are by John McPhee, and it helped cement Bradley's place among the role models I chose as a kid. He excelled both athletically and academically, as I wanted to do. He said something in that book about persistent effort that stuck with me. If I'm better than you now, and I practice more than you every day, how could you ever hope to catch me? Athletes and champions decide to take pride in their persistence and patience. They understand that in any endeavor there will be setbacks. They know better than to take these setbacks personally, to let them diminish their belief in themselves. Most of them have learned to take a big goal and break it into small steps. Suppose you're now a couch potato, but you set yourself a goal to compete in a complete full Ironman triathlon, swimming 2.4 miles in open water, running a 26.2 mile marathon, and biking 112 miles, one right after another. It's a formidable challenge. If you started out by trying to do a full triathlon, you would probably give up midway through the bike or marathon segment, assuming you didn't drown during the open water swim. But of course you wouldn't do that. You would start out training in a pool, extending your distance by a lap or so every week. You would begin with 10-mile bike rides, working gradually to a century, and so on. Doing it this way has several advantages when it comes to perseverance. It gives you a process to follow. It gives you a series of intermediate goals, and it gives you the satisfaction of meeting these smaller challenges along the way. If your goal is to get a little stronger and a little fitter every day, it's easier to see the sort of progress that helps sustain a commitment. That is, if you think about it, the way we learn most things we take up in childhood. A toddler learns to read one-syllable words, then to read books with pictures, then chapter books, and young adult fiction before moving on to the great books and perhaps a dissertation on literature. Advancing to the dissertation stage doesn't always seem like such a normal leap because it's done gradually. Perseverance comes a little easier, but a lot of people fail to fully understand the nature of this step-by-step process. They want to jump onto the end. When my daughter Casey was in the 4th grade, her teacher invited me to come and talk to the kids about writing books. I started out by asking them to remember when they first learned to write the letter A. Do you learn the capital A or the small a?